The honourable member for Regina West Canada.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'll be splitting my time today with the honourable member for Yorkton Melville. There's a lot of Canadian history going on in today's debate, so much so that I had to dig up my old university notes when preparing my speech. And on that note, at this time, I would like to thank my Economics History 206 professor from the University of Regina, Dr. Richard Clear, for his fascinating class way back when. And Dr. Clear, if you're watching, I have to say that I do believe my speech today is worth at least a few bonus marks in your class. So thank you very much. Before I get to the Canadian Pacific Railway, I'd like to talk a little bit about another historic Canadian company, if I may, the Hudson's Bay Company. In the year 1670, King Charles II granted the newly formed Hudson's Bay Company a monopoly on trading posts in all lands in North America whose rivers empty into Hudson Bay, an area including parts of present-day Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Quebec, Nunavut, as well as all of present-day Manitoba. Once King Charles II wrote up his royal charter and handed that piece of paper over to the Hudson's Bay Company, it became illegal for anyone else to operate a trading post in the land in North America that soon became known as Rupert's Land. This was great for business for Hudson's Bay Company trading posts. If any other entrepreneur opened up a competing trading post, Hudson's Bay could simply arrest them and throw them in jail. Madam Speaker, this situation continued on for 200 years until the Hudson's Bay Company voluntarily surrendered its trading post monopoly in exchange for compensation from the government. But the company still exists today in the form of Hudson's Bay department stores in malls all across the country. Now imagine for a minute if the board of directors of Hudson's Bay department stores woke up tomorrow morning and decided that they wanted their old monopoly back. Imagine if they went to court and tried to shut down Canadian Tire. Or imagine if they went to court and tried to shut down Shoppers Drug Mart. After all, Canadian Tire and Shoppers Drug Mart are violating the royal charter that granted the trading post monopoly to the Hudson's Bay Company way back in the year 1670. Madam Speaker, I hope everyone in this chamber can agree that this would be completely and totally ridiculous. Even if Hudson's Bay Company lawyers dusted off the original copy of the 1670 Royal Charter or the original copy of the 1870 Deed of Surrender, and if they found one I that was not dotted or one T that was not crossed, it would still be completely and totally ridiculous to shut down every Canadian Tire and Shoppers Drug Mart. One way or another, we as lawmakers would not allow that to happen. Madam Speaker, we have almost as ridiculous a situation developing today in my home province of Saskatchewan with the Canadian Pacific Railway, which is another Canadian company that is almost as historic as the Hudson's Bay Company. The construction of a transcontinental railway was a condition of the province of British Columbia joining Confederation in 1871. A few years later, this Parliament passed the Canadian Pacific Railway Act as a way to contract out the construction and operation of the new transcontinental railway. The terms were very generous. $25 million, 25 million acres of Crown land in Western Canada, including the mineral rights, a ban on new competing railways south of the main line, and certain tax exemptions for the Canadian Pacific Railway that were to last forever. A few years later, in 1905, when this Parliament decided to pass the Saskatchewan Act to create the province of Saskatchewan, the tax exemptions granted to the Canadian Pacific Railway were included in Section 24 of that Act and transferred to the newly created provincial government. Madam Speaker, these terms were very generous, and rightfully so. The whole idea of building a transcontinental railway in the 1800s must have been on the same scale as NASA going to the moon in the 1900s, or the prospect of sending astronauts to Mars in this century. The railway played a vital role in bringing British Columbia into Confederation and the settlement of Western Canada. And for their contribution, the Canadian Pacific Railway was well paid. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. And for CP Rail, these tax exemptions did come to an end in the year 1966. In that year, federal politicians, provincial politicians from Saskatchewan, and executives from CP Rail sat down and came to an agreement. At that time, all parties agreed that the tax exemptions included in Section 24 of the Saskatchewan Act would be discontinued in exchange for certain railway regulatory changes. And CP Rail has been paying their fair share of taxes ever since, just like everyone else. Madam Speaker, this is where the story should have ended. After CP Rail started paying their taxes in 1966, historians should have been able to turn that page on that chapter of our history, just like historians have long since turned the page on the Hudson's Bay Company's trading post monopoly. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. Recently, these tax exemptions, which are technically still on the books, have become the subject of a lawsuit in my home province of Saskatchewan. CP Rail has decided that they want to go back to the good old days when they didn't have to pay taxes. They want the tax exemptions specified in Section 24 of the Saskatchewan Act of 1905 to be reactivated and brought back to life so that company no longer has to pay taxes moving forward. CP Rail is also claiming that they are entitled to $341 million in taxes that they have been paying over the years, which they apparently didn't have to. Madam Speaker, this lawsuit is almost as ridiculous as if the Hudson's Bay Company were to try to shut down Canadian Tire and Shoppers Drug Mart for violating the trading post monopoly granted to them by King Charles II in the year 1670. The only difference in this case is that, yes, technically Section 24 of the Saskatchewan Act of 1905 is still on the books. And so, yes, we have not quite turned the final page on that chapter of our history. Madam Speaker, the time has come to turn the page. While I have a great deal of respect and admiration for the contributions that the Canadian Pacific Railway has made to our collective history, the time has come to treat them like any other company, and that means paying their fair share of taxes. It is finally time to repeal Section 24 of the Saskatchewan Act of 1905. I will be voting in favor of this motion brought forth by my friend and colleague, the Honourable Member for Regina Louvain, and I encourage all members to do the same. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. Questions, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the fact, and I hope to be able to expand upon it in terms of, CP did enter into an agreement, and that was back in the mid-60s, 65, 66, as no doubt there would have been some discussions into the lead-up of it. But I think it's important for us to recognize that CP as a company, as a corporation, has been paying taxes. I don't know what triggered CP, whether it was a young intern or whomever, to ultimately decide that this issue should be going to a court. But my question to the member is he aware of the situation? Do we know why it is CP made the decision to move in a direction of going to court?
A member for Regina Wascana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the short answer is no. I have done some research outside of my economics history class, I have to say, and I've come up without an answer to that particular question. Some management and directors decided that this would be a good idea, and CP Rail is giving it the old college try, but I do not know what motivated them to go down this path.
Honorable député de Jonquière.
Merci, Madame.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Well, Madam Speaker, you are just as radiant as ever. Now I have a quick question for our colleague. I think he has indeed shown that it's an aberration that CP is not paying taxes. He has said that clearly. Now, what I don't understand as well is the ambivalence of our Liberal colleagues. Since the beginning of the day, they seem ambivalent about supporting our Conservative colleagues' motion. Can our colleague explain why, in his opinion, our Liberal colleagues seem ambivalent about this?
Honourable Member for Regina Westcon.
Well, I would like to thank the honourable member from the bloc for his question. It's a question that's probably best posed to the Liberals on the other side of the House, if I may say. It is certainly my sincere hope that all members in this House will be supporting this motion. It's very reasonable and more than a little bit overdue, as I think I have laid out. And I would also like to lay out that. It's my understanding that CP Rail has been paying their taxes since 1966, and it is certainly my hope and expectation that they will be moving forward as well.
Honourable Member for Esquimalt, Sanish Suk.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for Regina Wascana for his contribution to us remembering the history of what we're talking about today. And as a member from Vancouver Island, of course, I can't resist pointing out that we were promised train service as well. That train service ended on Vancouver Island almost 10 years ago now. And so maybe there's another thing we need to fix. But I want to return to something I raised earlier, and that is the member for Regina Wascana talked about corporations paying their fair share of taxes. And as I said before, I'm glad to hear all members agreeing on that. But does that zeal for paying their fair share of taxes extend to closing down the use of international tax havens, or perhaps a surtax on those who profiteered during the pandemic?
The Honourable Member for Regina Wascana.
Well, I think everyone is in favor of everyone paying their fair share. It is our responsibility as parliamentarians to decide what is everyone's fair share. In terms of offshore tax havens, I think that warrants more than a little bit of investigation from the CRA to see if there are some loopholes that are being closed. As for profiting during the pandemic, I think it is a good thing if some companies who maybe owned a brewery or a distillery retrofitted their factories to make hand sanitizer or other PPE or that sort of thing. So I certainly don't want to disincentivize entrepreneurs who have responded to the pandemic in a positive way.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Menick.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we've heard so many questions about nothing coming from the government side on this, and which is confuses us over where the government is standing on this very fair and justice bill. Can my honourable member tell us what did he gather from the government position on this important bill? Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Regina Wascana.
Well, perhaps some of the members on this side of the House should be in government someday, and then we could get this matter taken care of. But my understanding is that all parties will be supporting this very reasonable motion, and I hope that that applies to the Liberals as well.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.